Okay, so welcome to this latest Travolution COVID-19 webcast. I'm delighted this morning that I'm joined by Simon Cox. He's a Senior Director in the Customer Experience and Innovation Practice at Publicis Sapient. And we're going to go through in the next half an hour or so some thoughts about the impact of this incredible crisis on travel, some thoughts about what travel firms can do now, and then actually how they can look to the future and emerge from this in some sort of decent state. I was thinking about, how we start this, Simon, and I just think about the famous quote, I think attributed to Mike Tyson, who said, everyone has a plan until they're punched in the mouth. And it kind of feels like travel's taken a full blow. I mean, it really has been hit first and hit hardest as well of all the sectors. So you're all about planning and strategy. You advise a lot of companies.
Yeah.
Many will simply not have had a plan in place for this kind of thing happening. Obviously, it's such a black swan event. But how do companies plan for these kind of events and to make sure they're in the best state? Is it possible, or does this show that maybe they should have plans in place to mitigate the impact?
Yeah, I mean, I love that quote, and it feels like it might be pretty close to one of Mike Tyson's famous kind of 10-second knockouts. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. What we've noticed, I can give you a little bit of experience of what we've seen at kind of Publicis Sapient, and I mean, one of the benefits we have is that we don't just see travel and hospitality. So we're seeing reactions across financial sector. We're seeing reactions across energy and commodities. What's happening in retail. And I think we're starting to see there are some kind of commonality between how different industries are reacting. And of course, the first reaction is crisis. The last thing they need is someone like me on the phone saying, let's make a plan. It's kind of like the plan is, how can we survive, day by day? And obviously, what is involved in that is trying to get to some level of kind of operational kind of coherence, trying to get to a point where most of my days, most of my conversations with clients in kind of the usual world is trying to talk about growth. Where can you eke out new sources of growth? How can you be more efficient in your kind of, marketing effectiveness? Clearly, what's happening at the moment for most companies is we just need to find ways to preserve cash and, take cost out of the business. So that's kind of where a lot of we're seeing our clients at the moment. And that's where we're trying to help them in terms of, just again, trying to make them more efficient as a business. We've all heard the stories of kind of, call centers that can't cope because their, staff is down. Obviously, a lot of consumers, particularly in travel, who are, have booked holidays, have booked flights, putting a lot of pressure into call centers. So we're doing a lot of work there to try and, again, digitize and triage to help in that respect. So no, we're not in the phase of kind of long-term planning. We're very much in the phase of helping from crisis management, and then move into a more still tactical, but a more kind of focused and tactical approach that will come out of that. And we've been talking about these kind of stages and how they may evolve as we come through, but no plans at the moment.
So we're 4 weeks into sort of official lockdown in the UK, but actually some firms were moving before that. So you'd expect most, I guess, now to be in a position where they've done as much as they can do to sort of basically go into hibernation. Is that your sense that most have done that? We've actually seen we haven't seen really failures en masse yet. So it suggests that people have managed to find a way to keep going in whatever way that was. Is that your sense at the minute, or are people still struggling with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen it in a couple of ways, and I think what you said there is absolutely right, that we forget that this is 4 weeks, and I guess if you look at a usual, 4-week spell in kind of, again, going back to business as usual, 4 weeks is such a small period of time, but it obviously feels like a huge amount of time at the moment. I guess the concern is that, you can potentially manage cash for 4 weeks, but can you manage cash for 3 months, 5 months, 6 months? And it feels to me a little bit like, with the, with what's happening, we keep getting told we're not at the peak yet. We're trying to flatten it. And I think there's probably a similar analogy for business, that we're still in the kind of early phases. And I guess the decision then becomes how quickly can we emerge, and you know, what strength will we be in when we do emerge.
Yeah, I did one of these the other day, and what was said was, you know, look at take your worst case scenario and expect it to be worse than that, which sounds very depressing, not very optimistic. But I think that just reflects maybe how companies need to prepare themselves, because I guess if it doesn't come to that, you're then surprised on to the upside, which is always a good thing. Is that you know, good advice to think about the worst case scenario, not be too optimistic?
I think you've got it, haven't you, in this type of scenario? You know, if I look at Publicis, us as a business, you know, we're taking a similar approach there. You know, we're a 30,000 strong global business, and you know, we've had to take a similar approach with our business, which is absolutely making sure that we're making the right decisions. We're looking after each other, looking after our own safety, staying really, really connected as a business. But obviously, on the other side of that, getting incredibly close to our clients, being there when we're needed, and also, you know, preserving the integrity of the business, preserving cash within our business. And so, I think in many respects, you know, what we're trying to do in our business is probably reflected in what a lot of businesses are trying to do, you know, running that day-to-day operation as well.
One of the big challenges that travel's had is that yeah, the pub down the road for me is closed up. They're boarded up the windows. They're not selling any beer, but they're not buying any beer. All their staff will be probably on furlough. They've taken all the costs out. It's effectively quiet, and it's you know, to sleep. But travel businesses are still having to actually, well, in taking no revenue, they're still having to deal with customers, and they're actually dealing with refunds, so they've got negative revenue. So it's been really difficult for them to streamline like other sectors. You know, what are you seeing in terms of them trying to balance that between going to sleep as a company, but also trying to carry on offering customer service?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I spend quite a bit of time, for example, with airlines, with airports, and to your point, you know, they've obviously got a huge operational cost that you can't just flick a switch and put it on pause and say that we'll come back to that. You know, particularly when there is a significant cost if you do mothball of then trying to start up the operations later on. The challenge around kind of refunds is obviously a very, very difficult one. And there's a kind of, I think, you know, I talked about what we're trying to do with our business in terms of, you know, staying close to our clients. I think that's what, you know, brands ultimately are trying to do as well, in terms of, there's almost two ways you can go with this. You can kind of say, we're just going to shut down, you know, not communicate with customers. I'd imagine that most people, whether it's in retail or whether it's in travel, have had an experience like that in the last 4 weeks, where you've seen that the resilience of the business just isn't there. You know, they don't have a fallback, and so they just can't communicate with you, and it builds up. You know, even though as consumers we appreciate that this is, you know, a difficult period of time, it still feels like companies should be able to correspond with us. We should be able to pick up the phone. You know, if there's a wait, it shouldn't be a 30-minute wait and then the phone goes dead. You know, if we're talking on email, we should get a response. So I think there's an acceptance that SLA times will be, you know, longer, but we still need to be able to communicate with companies. And I think, you know, what you're seeing is the best of breed comes out at these times. You know, the ones that are able to keep that communication going, and also the ones that you feel are dealing with you in an ethical kind of way. And I guess at the moment, it's kind of, you know, I saw some numbers from EasyJet yesterday that their winter bookings are as high as they've ever been. And I guess a lot of that is because of deferred bookings, where they're pushing people to defer rather than for refunds, which, you know, any of those tactics have to be kind of good tactics. Seeing it in other areas, for example, where, you know, whether it's gyms, whether it's paid TV, that you can kind of pause your subscription. So anything you can do to avoid breaking that relationship with that customer, and fundamentally, you know, cancelling that is a good tactic.
Yeah, it's funny, like you say, people are saying, look, we might be hard to get hold of, but I had an experience this week dealing with Vodafone. I needed to do something, and I got through to their call centre quite quickly. I.e., people aren't calling these call centres because they're warned that it could take a long time. So actually, there is some capacity there. And I spoke to a neighbour the other day, and he got his EasyJet flight refunded really quickly in a couple of days. It took him a few times to get through, but he got through straight away at one point. And so again, maybe similar's happening now, is the consumer is backing off a little bit, and actually the resilience can be there because of behaviour's changed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously key to keep engaging with customers through this, because we all know travel will bounce back. But it's difficult, I guess, to know what you do in that engagement. What should brands be doing at the moment in terms of engagement? And I think the best bit of advice I've heard is, if you think you've got a customer that will want a refund or a deferment, is get in contact with them before they come to you, because they come to you, they're probably already a bit nervous or even angry, and if you can cut that off at source, you can show you're doing a good job for them.
Exactly that point. And I think, again, what we will see is that, more and more the companies that have got the right technology in place, they can start to triage against this. So, the reality is, if I look in terms of, if I take cruises, for example, where, a lot of brands in cruise will have a very loyal customer base. They will know the people who have been on their ships, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. You're going to have to triage and prioritize. And I think it's critical, if you've got the right technology, to be able to do that. You have to be in front of, to your point, the people who are your loyalist customers, because they are going to be the people that are going to be first coming back to you, and you're going to need those customers in the future. So I think part of it is, do you have the right technology and the right operational capacity to be able to triage like that? But to your point, get in front of the customer as much as possible. I think people sometimes forget how, particularly with social media, there's an expectation that we've become very unreasonable as consumers. But I think, when you see a crisis like this, I saw a stat yesterday that, the percentage of people who are supporting the lockdown is incredibly high in the UK. People understand the need to lock down. I think they understand that we are in a crisis period. So you can buy yourself time with the right communication. But as I said before, it's when the brands go silent, that's where you allow the consumer to fill in the expectation they're not going to be dealt with properly, they're not going to get their money back. So I think it's those two things. If you can triage, speak to your loyal customers, show them what you're doing. Obviously, just be very human-centered. I've seen a few times where the email has come from the CEO, and whether the CEO is writing it is irrespective. There's a personal touch to that, and I think it buys a lot of goodwill for the future.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to talk about being human about it, because actually we're starved of human interaction at the minute. We all are. We're doing things like this, and it seems very strange. But actually, it's also, there's an opposite to that as well, where people are having more human interaction. They're not making phone calls; they're doing Zoom calls, or so an opportunity maybe there is that for brands, particularly maybe ones that are smaller, that are closer to the consumer, to actually make something out of this and re-engage with those customers in ways they hadn't been doing before.
Yeah, I would massively agree with that. And again, my experience, and everybody's experience, is that, to your point, I'm not picking up the phone anymore. I'm getting on video and talking to people, and regularly kind of checking in. And I think brands that can start to do that are going to, those brands that within the DNA, they have a kind of human touch, and I think you respond to those. I mean, we've all kind of had the poster child of the kind of first direct, so that when you speak to someone there, you're speaking to a human being, and it's always been kind of values within their business. But it's interesting how it's already starting to come into advertising. A lot of TV advertising at the moment is bringing out some of that community feel. Obviously saluting the amazing work that's going on in the NHS, putting the right messaging forward. So it's interesting how I've spoken to you about this a lot of time in the past, that I've got a belief that businesses are quite slow. They're not good at innovation. They're not good at speed often. It's interesting in a crisis like this how again, you go back, we've only been at this for 4 weeks, and seeing the level of speed and responsiveness in a lot of businesses, it's going to be interesting when we do come out of that, whether they can continue to harness that in the future.
Yeah, you mentioned loyalty, and obviously loyalty has been a big issue in travel for a long time. Loyalty schemes have been around for a very long time, as long as travel firms have been around. And I think in some ways, some of the criticisms of them has been that they're a bit inhuman. They're just a points-based thing, and it's you collect points like a game, really. it's not very human. So maybe what we'll see out of this is do you think some more loyalty schemes or approaches to loyalty that do really try and touch on what people really want out of their brand relationships?
Yeah, we've been talking to one of the major hotel chains who've got a big loyalty scheme. And what we've been looking at there is, for example, at the moment, if I've got points that have been accrued, can I use those for good causes? Could we, use those for whether it's in the US or the UK, to directly impact what's happening? Giving it to good causes, supporting the health workers, supporting the front line, if you like. And again, twofold in that. A, it's the right thing to do, but B, it also gives you another good reason to engage with your customer base. Again, show that you're being responsive, show that you're being supportive, and use that as a re-engagement approach, for your loyalty base. But I think increasingly, elements like loyalty schemes, again, I think it goes back to this kind of topic that we're going to be talking a lot about, which is this idea of resilience. Have you got kind of built-in resilience into your business? And the more flexibility that you've got, the more flexibility that you can offer to the consumer, I think that's where it's going to feel like that you are resilient. And if a crisis, the expectation is this is going to become the new norm as these crises happen, that you do offer the consumer to be flexible in how they use their loyalty points, for example, how they book, how they can pause a booking. All of that flexibility I think needs to be baked into the proposition in the future.
Yeah, it's been interesting to sort of, we'll see which brands emerge out of this in better shape than others. I mean, what obviously is the massive focus in the UK, for instance, is the health service, the NHS. It's very UK thing, that, but it's a health brand that we all know and love, and you kind of think, are larger global entities out there really able to talk about that in a meaningful way? Are the brands that are more local in some senses, better placed to attach themselves to what's going on there, to really sort of take the temperature of customer feeling and customer sentiment at the moment? And it's those that will emerge best out of this. What's your feeling about that?
Yeah, I think I can see it from two sides. I think, everything I'm seeing and reading is that we're probably going to go through a period of consolidation. I saw a report a couple of days ago that the expectation, I think in the US, for example, is that some of the smaller hotel chains are potentially, ripe for takeover. The kind of regulatory environment will be more supportive of takeover to ensure that companies don't go to the wall. So I think that's going to be interesting. I think there will be an element of a bit of an analogy, a football analogy, that the super clubs will survive, but the ones smaller down the pyramid are really going to struggle, and it will become the sort of survival of the fittest. I think it would definitely be interesting, though, how some of those smaller, because ultimately a lot of those smaller brands, the benefit they've got if they can come through this is that they do have agility. They are more nimble. They are able to respond. And they often have that level of authenticity that you talked about. So, and you can see how attractive that is to brands. I mentioned earlier that, brands are already trying to connect to that. Pretty much every brand that you see out there at the moment will be wanting to connect to something amazing like the NHS, and, the brand that is at the moment. So, for sure, I think we're going to see that. Whether those smaller brands can kind of then scale through this, I think that will be interesting.
Yeah, you mentioned innovation before, and as you said, we've discussed this in various sessions we've done face-to-face previously, and out of crises, out of downturns, there's always something that emerges out of it that's not been seen before. It's innovative. Do you think that this is the kind of thing that could spur innovation? It could make companies think, actually it's no good carrying on like we were. We must be more innovative. We must have that baked into the way we operate.
Yeah, I think that's undoubtedly going to be the case, because, again, if I go back into when we've talked about this before, that, often innovation needs that C-suite sponsorship. It's very difficult to get these little pockets of innovation. You need something that is a catalyst. And clearly, as I say, at the moment, we're seeing that natural innovation of, the innovation that's driven by a crisis. To be able to build a hospital in a matter of days, particularly again the NHS. Everyone I know who speaks to the NHS or works in the NHS will say it's bureaucratic, it's siloed, but all of a sudden you can bring those silos down and do something amazing. You look to companies that you've always felt have innovation absolutely at the core of their business, like Formula One, who all of a sudden can turn around and start to create a ventilator within a few days and already start to scale it. And I think what we'll see coming out of here, as I said, is that when the focus becomes focused on resilience, crisis management, how would we cope if this happened again? If this becomes the new norm, I think we're going to see a lot of C-suite who are going to say, let's be much more focused. Let's clear out stuff that is not creating the right level of outcomes, that isn't creating a genuine return on investment. And they will inevitably focus on the enablers of innovation, speed, making sure that we've got the right technology in the place, bringing silos down, creating that environment will ultimately lead to more innovation.
Do you actually think we see innovation at its best when it's done out of necessity in a crisis?
Yeah, because I think again, you go back to some of the poster childs around innovation, and the Skunk Works podcast is an amazing podcast that talks about innovation, and it all goes back to what was happening in the Second World War. The ability to build a new plane and build it in the speed that it did, because you just can't. The beauty of a crisis is that it's not business as usual. Business as usual is the thing that kills all innovation, because it gets us back into we're all really around just optimizing current practices. When you rip up the rule book and you say, throw the current practices out the window and we just got to get into that kind of crisis, inevitably that creates the right rich environment for then doing new things, not respecting those existing norms. And that's where you get into a rich space for innovation for sure.
Yeah. So I'm sure that resilience and forward-looking work that will be going on will prompt all companies really to probably just review their models. In some ways, because you're not doing any work at the minute, you're in a hibernation period. You can do a reset if you need to. Do you think a lot of companies will look at their models and try and ask themselves really serious questions about what they're doing, whether they can do things differently or completely differently to what they were before?
Yeah, I think we will definitely see that. And I think, again, there's maybe two sides to that coin. I think we have to appreciate that I'm a little bit cynical that we'll come out of this as consumers completely changed. I'm going to come out of this fitter than when I went in, maybe, but within about 3 months' time, 4 months' time, a lot of those norms will reply. Human beings don't change that quickly. But I think businesses will need to change, because I think some of our expectations will be different. Some of the examples that we've heard talking to within our clients, and as a consumer, are you going to want to go into a hotel in the future? Are you going to want to eat a buffet breakfast in the future? The kind of staple of hotels, probably not. In terms of areas like check-in. So I think we're going to see businesses that are going to look at much more automation is going to be important for them, particularly. If I look at the work that we do in financial services, a lot of that work has been predicated on, can we do more with less capital and less cost, and obviously automation, data and being able to unlock the power of artificial intelligence. These are all areas that will optimize companies in the future, and I think more and more we're going to start seeing businesses that they're not going to just talk about this. It's going to be an absolute kind of top table priority.
Yeah. One of the talking points that obviously is really relevant at the minute is how technology can be used to mitigate the impact of the virus itself. People traveling around, we see places like Taiwan, China looking at using mobile phone data and all this personal data that up until now, I think probably it's fair to say in the West, we've been more reticent about allowing companies to make use of, but obviously now we see a use case that there's a clear benefit in keeping health and safety, but still being able to move around the planet. So, and you know, you said, how will the customer change? Do you think the customer sentiment on that might change, and we'll see a kind of rapid movement then in use of data and AI to sort of accompany that, to make that data meaningful?
Yeah, and the honest answer is I'm not sure at the moment, because I went back to when we tried to digitize health records in the UK. What was it, like 15 years ago? And it got to the point where adoption was just too low and people just didn't see it. To your point, whether the benefit becomes one that is so high that, you know, I imagine that if they would turn around and put a condition of easing the lockdown on kind of, 80% of people having a kind of NHS tracking and app, you'd probably see that overnight. So I think those use cases are there. Obviously, companies are going to have to be very, reassuring in how that data is used. We're already at the situation, I think, now where if I'd have painted a picture, 5 years ago of governments are going to lock down in, 2/3 of the planet, and the kind of restrictions that would be in place, and then when you come out, they're going to have a monitoring app on your phone, you would have said, this is Orwellian, it's never ever going to happen. So I think we have to be aware that, that's going to happen, obviously, at a kind of country level. I think brands just need to be careful. You can already see the use cases for, do I need a COVID passport that goes on my app before I can go into an airport, before I can go through a country? It's going to be interesting on who has the responsibility for that. Should that sit with the airline, with the airport? Should it sit with the government? Again, we don't have the legislative real frameworks yet. A lot of our work is often, we're a business that wants to push, and often we're rightfully pulled back by the framework and the legislation enacting within that. We're in a world now where these frameworks aren't really in existence, so that's going to be another interesting thing that we're going to have to look at.
Yeah, I suppose that that idea of keeping data safe but usable, people might say, well, that's exactly what blockchain or something like that was sort of invented for. Maybe this is the thing that spurs understanding of and use of blockchain potentially. Could you see that?
Yeah, 100%. And again, we've already seen that and had conversations in our business around the potential opportunities for there, because having transparency is going to be really important. And as consumers, again, you have to, we are in, if you like, we're in that kind of crisis phase, but what the inevitable use cases will happen will be that even if it's not necessarily, true, when somebody says, well, I've been blocked for insurance for the first time, why did I get blocked? Is it because I've got an app on my phone that has got data that has said that I was a COVID-19 risk? Or, people are going to get concerned and worried about that very, very quickly. And I think a solution like a blockchain solution, what that starts to give, obviously, is a high level of transparency across all of the different stakeholders involved. And I think that will become very reassuring to consumers.
Yeah. And what about the world of work itself? I mean, we're using Zoom. I don't think I'd used it until a couple of weeks ago, or even heard of it. Using Microsoft Teams in work and all sorts of different ways of communicating. And we're kind of getting used to not being in the office every day and commuting and so on. That could change things hugely. You can see corporates thinking, maybe it's a great way to save some money here is not have such big HQs in large, expensive cities. How does that generally change things? Do you think going forward? Do you think there'd be a fundamental change, or will we just eventually just go back to how things were?
I think it's an area which I think there will be a change, because I think I was listening to someone yesterday who was talking about how workplaces are going to have to remodel, and when they remodel, you're not going to have the same space that you had pre-COVID. I think I heard in the BBC, for example, at the moment that it's one person in an elevator. There's a stairs where you go up and there's a stairs where you go down. You can't sit within 2 meters. If I look at my office environment, we wouldn't have the 600 people in the London HQ under those kind of conditions. We just can't have that many people in there. So I think it is going to change. And I also think, of course, I do a lot of flying as part of my life. And of course, these are the moments where you start to question the need for that type of, do I need to fly to every single meeting? I think this has been the proven use case that you can collaborate, you can work very, very efficiently with the technology that we've got in place at the moment. So I think that it inevitably will drive changes.
Yeah, and obviously that then tests lots of models out there, because a lot of aviation businesses models are based on a lot of business class flyers paying full price. So.
Yeah, 100%. I remember working on British Airways a few years ago, and obviously the percentage of contribution that came from business was huge. And when the margins are so small in those businesses, it only takes a 5% reduction, a 10% reduction in people who are flying can have a huge impact on businesses, as we know.
Yeah. Well, look, just to wrap up, I just thought let's take us a bit of a view going forward, and just assume we've got a very uncertain recovery out of this. I mean, I think early doors there was hope of V-shaped and very rapid, just come back to normal recovery. I think increasingly that looks unlikely for travel. How the shape is very unclear. It could be W or all sorts of different shapes, who knows? But it definitely doesn't seem like something you can really predict with a great amount of certainty. So what's your best bit of advice for companies planning for what looks like an uncertain, certainly mid-term future?
It's probably the obvious advice, which is you're just going to have to be, so conscious of cost and keep maintaining focus on your cost base. Anything that you can do to be more operationally efficient, you've just got to do it at this point in time. I think that that's absolutely critical. I think the other aspect of it is having a robust plan for when you start to emerge. And again, I think you can take consumers and your loyal consumers on that journey with you. That everything says to me that this is not going to be we wake up and we're open and we kind of open the curtains and we sort of go, oh, we're all back to normal. It's going to take time. There will be blips along the road. I think have a plan of how you're going to emerge. Active communications is absolutely vital within there. And then I think the other advice I'd always give is just scenario plan. Just keep scenario planning. We never had a scenario plan of what would happen if 100% of the country went into lockdown. I think in the future we're going to need to think much more about that scenario planning of what happens if. I think that's going to be a kind of key mantra that we're going to hear as well.
Yeah. I guess to go back to Mike Tyson, it's about being fleet of foot so you can avoid being punched in the mouth at all, and probably be ready to go back again if things start to come back and we've got more problems in the future. Yeah,
and actually, the more I think about Mike Tyson, the one thing I could guarantee if I went into a fight with Mike Tyson is he's going to punch me in the face.
Yeah. Well, look, Simon, thanks very much for your time today. I hope you're keeping well and the family's well. I'm sure you're doing all the right things, staying at home for the time being. I'm sure it won't be long before we do meet up again at one of Travel's many events. Until then, thanks very much for this morning, and we'll speak again soon.